Hi readers, happy Valentine's Day, or day after Valentine's Day as of when this is posted. Um, Cosmos came running in to say hi. Um, I was going to review a different book this week, but on Tuesday I realized that a certain book that I had on my list for this year is actually Valentine's themed. So I started this book on Tuesday, and then I finished it at about 3 a.m. last night. I'm recording this on Saturday, and this is Saturday's video. So, today's review is You Will Be Mine by Natasha Preston, which, it's another one of her books. I have only 3 more left that I haven't read of the ones that I own after this, but I'm in the middle of like 5 books right now, but just out of nowhere, once I realized this was Valentine's, I was like, that would be thematic to post today, so I want to try and finish it, and I did. And so this book, actually, this book is interesting compared to some of her other books, and I realized I should probably try to not compare them too much to the others for people who haven't read all of them or who may not want to. But I will say, out of the ones that I've read, this one is the only one that has a time skip epilogue, so far, of the ones I've read. So maybe that happens in others, but this one ends with a year time skip. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because I don't want to spoil it. But, all of her others have ended really suddenly, kind of at the end of the main action of the story. And this one, has a year pass, and then something still happens at the end. But this one, I was actually surprisingly not angry about. That's kind of been the theme, is that a lot of her books, when I finish them, I'm like, how dare she end it like that? That's just, no. But this book, I actually thought the ending was good, which, it still ends kind of on a cliffhanger, but it ends on a cliffhanger where you're like, yeah, well, like, it's fine. Compared to some of her others. Like, it's still a cliffhanger, but it's not implying the death of the protagonist at the very end, or the death of a major character at the very end. So, yes, this book, it basically starts... Cosmos is yelling. He sees cars. Yeah, so Cosmos is a little distracting, but it basically starts with, I believe it starts on the 1st of February, and this one is also interesting because I think the characters are aged a little bit older, because a lot of her books have been high school age protagonists. These characters are in college. And they go out to a Valentine's event, and one of them starts getting this weird note that they think at first is like, oh, it's a Valentine's prank, or it's a love note or something. But it's got kind of a creepy, sinister undertone to it, and then, I feel like I can say it because it is what it says on the back, but, and it happens really early on, but, like, that character, the notes were not just an innocent prank, like, they were actually serious. I will say this one is also interesting, because I feel like there's more of a gore element than some of her other books, where it's like, yes, her other books are murder mysteries, but the way that these characters get killed, and how they're left has a bit more gore than some of the others, where it's just like, oh yeah, this body was found. This one, it like goes into detail, and the protagonists see a lot of the gore part. What I will say, though, is this one is really interesting, too, because from very early on, the characters think they know who did it, and I was right about it. So I am excited, because I don't even know how early, but, like, a couple chapters in, I was like, something seems off about this interaction, something seems off about this character, something seems off about how this character's timing is and how they know certain things, and I was right. So I'm excited about that, because it's always fun to have a theory really early on and then be right. I wasn't sure exactly why, like, because I was like, I don't really know what the motive would be for that, but it was definitely like, I feel like it's that person, and it was, and the motive is very interesting, which I'm obviously not gonna say what it is, because I don't want to give too many spoilers, but this book is, I'd say, maybe my favorite of her books now. I really liked The Fear, because I thought the premise of it was really interesting, which was the second of her books that I read, but the ending obsessed me. So, that kind of tainted it a little bit. But I really, really enjoy this book, because it didn't end with me wanting to throw it at a wall, which, to be fair, I haven't thrown any of her books at a wall yet. There's one book ever in my life I've thrown at a wall, and it's not one of hers. And I still have The Party, The Cellar, and Awake to read of hers that I own so far, but we'll see. Maybe one will get thrown at a wall. But this one wasn't. This one was actually good, and I said in my last review of one of her books, which was The Cabin, that was maybe the least infuriating ending, because it ended in such a way where it was like, it was still a cliffhanger, but it wasn't quite as deadly a cliffhanger. But this one, actually, I thought the ending to this was good, because it ended still dramatically, but, like, different kind of dramatically. And also, like I said, it's interesting because it's the only one that has a time skip so far. I don't know about the other three yet, but all of the others have kind of ended abruptly, and this one had a really dramatic ending and then an epilogue. So the epilogue was something that I thought was really interesting, because a lot of times you don't get to see how the characters process what they went through in the main part of the book. Sometimes it's not even sure if they survived the book. Cosmos is making weird noises and about to fall off the couch. He's a little upset. He wants to go outside, but it's not quite time for that yet. But this book is, honestly, when I first read the back of it, I was kind of like, I don't know if this is necessarily, like, I was reading so many other things, and I was like, I'm not sure if I want to start this now, and then I was like, wait a minute, it's Valentine's Day, so I'm gonna read it, and it ended up being really good, and I couldn't put it down, and I stayed up until, like, 4 a.m. twice this week reading it. I finished it in, like, 3 days, and it's, I believe, the whole book, there's a little preview of The Cellar at the end of it, but the book is 281 pages of the actual book, You Will Be Mine. The other thing that I was going to say about it is I feel like this book is also interesting because the author lives in the UK. And it's been in her author's note, I think, every time, but for some reason with some of the books, I always didn't think that. I mentioned with The Cabin I thought they might be because of the whole drinking underage thing. But this one, it's clear that they are in the UK from the beginning, so it kind of like set that tone more. And another interesting thing is that this one has much more of like a law enforcement presence in the plot for like the whole thing. And there's a lot of times where they're a little bit incompetent, and I don't want to go too much into the realism of that because I know very little about law enforcement regulations or practices in the UK, so that's something very different. But a lot of her books don't really have people contacting law enforcement either because of threats or because they can't or because they're like not taking it seriously or they're like, I need to do this by myself. The other thing is this one is really interesting because compared to a lot of others, this has a romance subplot, which I guess kind of makes sense because it's a Valentine's Day book, but it's very different. And it's interesting too because there are certain times where the romance plot kind of becomes more prevalent. I don't know if that's the right word, but like the characters feel a certain way about each other, and there are times where I, as a single person, am like, this is not the time for that. Like, that's you have bigger problems than that right now. What are you doing? But then at the same time, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's a coping mechanism for them. But it's interesting because a lot of the others have had pretty much no romance, or they've had like a pre-existing relationship. In one that I'm going to be reviewing, the protagonist starts in a relationship. But this one's interesting because there is like a developing relationship throughout it, in a way that the others don't have. So that's very, very new. I don't know how the others are, the ones I haven't read yet, but I actually was gonna review this earlier, but the twin I read recently, and it also had an ending that was interesting. This ending was one that I was like, okay, good ending this time. That one was one where I was like, I'll get more into that when I actually review that one. But the last couple I've read by her, I feel like have been a little bit less angering. But anyway, this book, yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. Again, like a lot of her books, it's a little bit dangerous if you're gonna pick it up and start reading it because it is hard to put down. And I think if you have been kind of hesitant about her books because of what I've said about the endings being really bad, this one I think is good. It's still got a cliffhanger, but it also has more of a... I don't know how to really word it without giving spoilers, but it still ends on a cliffhanger, but it has a sort of security to it that a lot of her others don't, where the cliffhanger is like, someone just died, someone is dying, someone's life is destroyed, that kind of thing. And the cliffhanger in this is still kind of ominous, but it isn't like actively someone is dying. Cosmos is crying quietly to himself. Being a little bit dramatic, but he's okay. He is impatient because it's been very snowy recently, and he's like, I want to go outside, and it's time for my walk, and it's like, no, your walk happens like an hour later than now. But anyway, I think that if you want to get into Natasha Preston's books and you haven't read any of hers before, this is a good one to start with because it's kind of like an easing into the way she ends her books. And I feel like even though it is a cliffhanger, it's not as morbid of a cliffhanger. And it's also just an interesting book compared to some of her others because of the whole, there's an epilogue, there's a timescape, there's a romance plot, which is fascinating. And I was reading her author's note because I don't think I ever have read that before. And it says she enjoys writing NA romance, thrillers, gritty YA, and the occasional serial killer thriller. Which is interesting because I don't know if she has other books, but everything that I've read is thriller, murder mystery. With this one having a little bit of romance. But if I hadn't read that and I hadn't read this book yet, I would have no idea that she writes romance too. And it makes me wonder if she has any books that are just pure romance without the murder. I have not looked into that at all. But, yeah, this book was really interesting. It's also kind of funny because the character hates Valentine's Day, so maybe it's good I'm posting this video the day after Valentine's Day. It can be Valentine's themed without actually being Valentine's Day. But I feel like a bunch of people that I know kind of share that sentiment, like Valentine's Day is overrated or everything like that. So for her, she has an actual really valid reason why she hates Valentine's Day. But I think this is very, very good. Cosmos is crashing something around in the other room. So I'm going to end this so that I can give him some attention. But yeah, if you're into thriller, murder mystery, bit of romance with that, or you just want something to read around Valentine's Day or any time of the year, this is a good book. It's got a better ending than most of the other books that I've read by her, and it's got a very different ending than the twin, but the ending of the twin I fixed for myself, so that one's also pretty good. But yes, You'll Be Mine, I recommend it. If you don't do well with cliffhanger endings, maybe not. It's kind of mild compared to some of her others, which is why it is a good introduction to her books and her ending style. But it's definitely dramatic. It's very interesting, the motive and who it is and what happened. And I called it from the beginning who it is, but it was cool to kind of see that unravel and figure out who it is and why, because the why wasn't obvious to me. So highly, highly recommend it. It's got some different dynamics than some of her other books, which is really interesting. So if you've read this, let me know what you thought of it, or if you're going to read it, let me know. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Please try to avoid major spoilers if you're going to comment about it for other people who may not have read it. But thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked it, and keep reading. Bye!